Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Eli Bennett moved to the quiet woods of Georgia, he thought he'd found freedom. But one delivery truck, a power-hungry HOA, and a fake terror alert turned his peaceful life into a legal war zone. What began as a furniture drop became a federal showdown. It was supposed to be a clean break, a fresh start, away from the daily grind of Atlanta traffic and the constant buzz of urban chaos. I had finally bought the place I'd been dreaming of for years. A tall, timber-framed house nestled in the woods near Milton, Georgia, with a wraparound porch, floor-to-ceiling windows, and just enough land to breathe without bumping elbows with the next guy. My name's Eli Bennett, 45 years old, general contractor, and, as of 3 months ago, proud owner of what I considered to be a slice of American freedom. And, best of all, no HOA. I made damn sure of that before signing a single document. I'd had enough of dealing with entitled board members and their lawn height commandments back when I lived in Roswell. I wanted independence. The land I bought wasn't inside any subdivision, and the private access road that ran along the edge of a gated community called Granite Pines was registered, documented, and mine to use. Publicly maintained, no restrictions. It just happened to pass by their entrance gates. That's it. They didn't like it, sure, but they had no say over it. At least, that's what I believed at the time. Granite Pines had a reputation in town, even before I moved nearby. Security-focused, people called it. Over-policed, if you asked the delivery guys or the local contractors. Residents there lived in neat little rows of manicured brick, every house identical like they were churned out by a bored god with a copy-paste tool. I wasn't their kind of neighbor, and I was more than fine with that. The trouble started the day my delivery was scheduled. I had a shipment coming in from South Carolina, vintage furniture, a couple of solid walnut pieces, and some high-end appliances for the new kitchen. Nothing shady, nothing illegal, just big, expensive, awkward to move. The delivery was being handled by a guy I'd worked with before, Mark Halsey. Good kid. 29, clean-cut, polite to a fault, licensed for interstate transport, and always on time. I trusted him. Still do. That morning, I was on the property, clearing some space in the garage to make room for the offload. Mark texted that he was 10 minutes out, following the GPS route I'd sent him. Public roads, straight shot, no detours. The sun was out, cicadas humming, birds doing their thing. Peaceful, until my phone rang again. I answered, expecting Mark. I got chaos. Eli, it's Mark. I don't know what's going on. Some guys in SUVs just blocked the road. Said I can't pass. They're in uniform. It says Granite Pines Security Division or something. They're yelling about suspicious cargo and demanding to search the truck. Man, they've got me out of the cab. One of them's got his hand on his weapon. What the hell is this? I dropped the wrench I was holding and jumped into my truck. It took me 5 minutes to get to the stretch of road that ran alongside Granite Pines. That's when I saw them. 2 matte black SUVs with flashing amber lights had boxed in Mark's delivery truck. One was nose-to-nose with the front bumper, the other angled behind like some kind of low-budget tactical maneuver. Men in dark gray uniforms with radios and utility belts were circling Mark, who stood there looking like he'd wandered into a war zone wearing a UPS polo. One of the guards had already popped the back latch on the truck. He hadn't opened it yet, probably waiting for backup, or maybe for the show to get more dramatic. Mark's hands were in the air. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of my vehicle, waving papers like a lunatic. Hey, what the hell is this? This is a legal delivery to my property, on a public road. One of the guards turned to me, holding up his palm like he was a cop. Sir, stay back. This is an active security response. Security response? For what? Furniture? He didn't flinch. We have reason to believe the cargo in this vehicle may pose a threat to community safety. We're authorized to detain the driver and notify local authorities. I shoved the property deed and delivery contract toward him. This truck is on its way to my land. I have every legal right to receive this delivery. And this road, it's not your goddamn driveway. It's county maintained. You don't control it. Sir, he repeated, cold as a rattlesnake. We're not debating jurisdiction with civilians. Step back. Before I could argue further, blue and red lights crested the hill. Sheriff's deputies, 2 cruisers, guns holstered, but hands hovering near them. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. Mark tried to speak, but one of the guards cut him off, shouting over his shoulder to the deputies. Driver refused inspection. Possible hazmat cargo. We recommend detainment until further investigation. It took less than a minute. One of the deputies motioned Mark toward his cruiser, reading him his rights. The other spoke into his radio. The delivery truck, my truck, sat inert, surrounded by uniforms and suspicion. I stood there, holding every piece of paper that proved who I was and what was supposed to be happening. And no one gave a damn. The final insult. One of the security guards turned to me and said, "We take threats to our community very seriously, Mr. Bennett. You should have informed us before allowing unidentified vehicles through our perimeter." I wanted to punch his teeth down his throat, but I didn't. I just watched as they took Mark away in cuffs and slapped an evidence seal across the back door of the truck. I'd never felt more powerless on my own land, and I knew right then this wasn't about rules or safety. This was about control, and I was going to burn them to the ground with it. I drove home alone that evening with a silence in the cab so loud it felt like a siren. My mind kept spinning like a loose screw. Mark arrested, my furniture impounded. All because some suburban Napoleon with a walkie-talkie decided he could play national security. I kept replaying the look on Mark's face when they cuffed him, like a guy who'd just been thrown into a Kafka novel and asked to explain himself in Russian. I spent that night at my dining table, a bottle of whiskey in reach, sorting through documents and emails, lining everything up like ammo for war. The delivery contract, GPS route history, screenshots of my deed, zoning maps showing the damn road was public. Every damn thing I had to prove what should have never needed proving. But that wasn't the part that got to me. It was the smirk. That smug, bureaucratic smirk on the security guy's face when he said, "You should have informed us." Us? Who the hell were they? The next morning, I was at the sheriff's department by 8. The receptionist gave me the usual wait over there routine. Eventually, a deputy brought me into a side room and closed the door. "Mr. Bennett," he said, like he already regretted talking to me, "your associate is in holding pending review." Standard procedure, given the nature of the call. Nature of the call, I cut in. What exactly did that HOA report say? He glanced at a file. Report came from the Granite Pines Security Division. They indicated your delivery truck was observed carrying unmarked containers consistent with hazardous materials and that the driver refused to comply with a lawful safety inspection. I blinked. What containers? It was a couch and a stove. Maybe some drywall screws if he packed light. The deputy gave a non-committal shrug. Look, the HOA mentioned they received multiple complaints about an unfamiliar vehicle acting suspiciously near a residential entrance, so they escalated it. I leaned forward. And by escalated, you mean they called in a hazmat threat? To you. He hesitated. Actually, not us. The initial tip went to the ATF hotline. That shut me up cold. The Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Bureau, I asked slowly. He nodded. They got a tip late the night before. Anonymous, but the details matched what HOA reported later. Possible presence of chemical agents was the language used. I sat back, my mouth dry. That's why they had moved so fast. That's why the deputies didn't even blink before cuffing Mark. Someone had used the keywords, the ones that trigger red flags in federal databases. Was there anything actually found in the truck? I asked. He flipped a page. As of this morning, no. Nothing illegal, contents pending inspection, but preliminary review says household items, furniture, appliances, no contraband, no chemicals. I left with that numb clarity you get right after a car accident, when your body's fine, but your brain hasn't quite caught up to the fact that everything just changed. Mark's family had already hired a criminal attorney by the time I called them, some pitbull named Rosso out of Savannah. Meanwhile, I got on the line with Mary Langston, my civil attorney and longtime friend who owed me a favor from way back when I rebuilt her lake house after her ex set it on fire. I laid it all out. The road, the delivery, the blockade, the ATF call, the arrest. She didn't speak for a good 10 seconds after I finished. Then she said, "We're going to court." Big. Before she even finished her coffee that afternoon, she was combing through the HOA bylaws, none of which applied to me, and zoning documentation confirming the road was public. She also found something I hadn't noticed. The stretch of road in question was registered under Fulton County maintenance since 1979. Granite Pines had only existed since 2003, but it wasn't just about maps and rules. Mark's lawyer, Rosso, managed to get a copy of the original call transcript made to the ATF tip line. It wasn't easy. He had to pull strings, but when he read it to me over the phone, my blood froze. Caller reports unmarked cargo containers with possible metallic tubing and electrical wiring entering community without clearance. Possible explosive precursor materials. Recommends immediate detainment. Suspect is non-compliant and evasive. Claims destination is a non-member lot in the area under HOA dispute. Non-member lot, that was me. They didn't just want to stop a truck, they wanted to drag me into their zone. By force, if needed. Mary looked at me and said, "You realize what this is, right? They didn't just lie. They tried to manufacture a threat to get federal force involved." The real twist came later that day when I got a call from a friend of mine at the county zoning office. He'd been poking around for me, unofficially. Apparently, Granite Pines had submitted an inquiry 6 months earlier asking whether the undeveloped parcel adjacent to their eastern road, which happened to be my land, could be rezoned under their jurisdiction. The request was denied twice. Now they were trying to police the access anyway. When I checked my security cams, I saw something else. A night before the arrest, around 11 p.m., a black SUV rolled slowly past the road, stopped briefly near the edge of my property line, then backed out and left. Mark's truck hadn't even arrived yet. They weren't reacting to anything. They were waiting, planning, hoping to catch something or someone they could use. And it worked. Until now. By the third day, the situation had stopped feeling local. It didn't feel like a power-hungry HOA anymore, or even an overzealous private security firm. It felt bigger, heavier, like I'd tripped a wire that went straight into a federal building somewhere with no windows and too many flags. That morning started with a call I didn't expect. Unknown number, Washington, D.C. area code. Mr. Bennett, a calm male voice said, "This is Special Agent Thomas Keller with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I'd like to ask you a few questions regarding a delivery vehicle intercepted near Granite Pines." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to swear so hard my phone would melt. "You mean the furniture truck?" I said. "The one with a couch and a stove." There was a pause on the line. Not an awkward one, a measured one. "Yes, sir." That vehicle. An hour later, 2 unmarked federal vehicles rolled up near the impound lot where Mark's truck was being held. I was already there with Mary. Mark had been released the night before without charges, but his truck was still sealed like it had hauled plutonium instead of walnut furniture. The ATF agents were nothing like the HOA goons. No shouting, no posturing, just quiet professionalism and a kind of restrained irritation, like people who were very aware their time had been wasted. They broke the seal, opened the back of the truck, and stood there staring for a moment. One of them actually sighed. "This is it?" one agent asked, gesturing at a shrink-wrapped armoire. "That's the bomb," I said dryly. "Mid-century modern, very dangerous if dropped on your foot." Nobody laughed, but one of them shook his head. They went through everything. Every crate, every toolbox, every wrapped panel. They scanned, swabbed, photographed. No chemicals, no wiring beyond appliance cords, no suspicious materials, nothing remotely illegal. After 2 hours, Agent Keller pulled me aside. "Mr. Bennett, I'm going to be very clear," he said. "There was no basis for this tip. None." I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the sheriff mentioned it. "What exactly was reported?" He exhaled through his nose. The tip alleged the presence of explosive precursor materials, metallic tubing, electrical components, unmarked containers. It specifically referenced improvised explosive device construction indicators. My jaw tightened, and you took that seriously. "We don't have the luxury not to," he said flatly, "but what concerns us isn't the cargo. It's the report itself." That's when he explained it to me. Filing a false tip like that wasn't just lying to a cop. It wasn't a misdemeanor nuisance call. It was a federal offense. Making knowingly false statements intended to trigger a terrorism-related response could land someone in prison. Real prison. Not HOA court with folding chairs and bottled water. I asked him if they knew who made the call. "Not yet," he said, but the call originated from a VoIP service routed through a private network. However, subsequent reports submitted to local authorities referenced the same language, same phrasing, same alleged threat, same source, same voice. Someone had rehearsed it. By that afternoon, Mark called me. His voice sounded different, tight, guarded. "My company put my contracts on hold," he said. "They say it's temporary, pending review. But you know what that means." I did. In his line of work, even a whiff of federal involvement stuck like a stain. Nobody wanted to be the guy whose name popped up next to words like ATF and chemical agents, even if it was all bullshit. Mary was already moving. She sent formal requests to both the Sheriff's Department and the ATF, documenting the lack of findings and the false nature of the report. She also advised me to file a civil complaint immediately, not just for damages, but to lock in a timeline before anyone tried to rewrite it. That evening, another piece fell into place. Mary forwarded me an internal HOA email chain she'd obtained through a subpoena request tied to a prior zoning dispute. It wasn't about Mark directly, but it made my stomach drop. One message, sent months before I ever moved in, read, "If we don't establish control over that access road now, we lose leverage. The new owner won't cooperate. Escalation may be necessary." Escalation. That's what they called it. Not safety. Not concern. Escalation. The ATF wrapped up their on-site work the next morning. Before Agent Keller left, he gave me a look that told me he'd seen this kind of thing before. People weaponizing the system to get their way. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "we're opening a separate inquiry into the origin of the false report. I suggest you keep every record, every message, every camera feed you have." I nodded. Already doing it. As the federal vehicles drove away, Mark's truck finally cleared for release. I stood there watching the sun hit the chrome handles of furniture that had somehow triggered a terrorism response. Granite Pines wanted control. What they'd actually done was invite the federal government into their living room. And that never ends well. By the time Mary filed the paperwork, I was already past the point of being surprised. Furious, sure. Tired, absolutely. But surprised? Not anymore. That left me in a weird headspace, somewhere between a man preparing for war and a contractor trying to finish wiring a kitchen he hadn't been able to furnish because his goddamn oven had been treated like a biohazard. The lawsuit was aggressive. Mary didn't pull punches, and neither did Mark's lawyer, Rosso. We were coming in hot with a joint civil suit for $1 million. It named 4 defendants: Granite Pines HOA, their president Karen Westmore, the private security company Silverguard, and their incident supervisor, who went by Captain on his name tag like he was commanding a damn submarine. The charges? False imprisonment, defamation, intentional interference with a business relationship, abuse of authority, unlawful detainment, and civil conspiracy. If we could have thrown in being an insufferable control freak, we would have. My portion of the claim, $250,000, was for damage to my business reputation, contract interference, and the cost of the now delayed renovations. Mark's was the big one, $750,000. His company had officially suspended his contracts pending clarification of legal liabilities, and one of his long-term clients dropped him altogether. One anonymous tip had turned him from a reliable driver into a liability. Rosso wasn't just a lawyer, he was a scalpel. He'd worked federal cases before, and he knew exactly how to phrase things to make judges sit up straighter. Within 48 hours of the filing, we got a notice. The HOA had retained counsel, some polished boutique firm out of Buckhead that specialized in community integrity litigation, which basically meant keeping old money from being told no. Their first move, deny everything, classic. The HOA released a public statement calling the incident a tragic misunderstanding that stemmed from an abundance of caution and a desire to protect residents. They tried to make it sound like Mark had been randomly parked in the middle of their neighborhood waving around a chainsaw and screaming about fertilizer. Karen herself stayed quiet, not a word. But I knew her silence wasn't humility, it was strategy. Then, just when I thought we'd hit peak absurdity, we got our hands on something explosive. Mary had filed a formal discovery request, standard procedure. But the response from the HOA included a file they clearly hadn't reviewed properly before sending, a forwarded chain of internal messages between board members. And in that chain was a line from Karen, dated 3 days before Mark's arrest. "The county screwed us on that parcel. If we don't act now, he's going to do whatever he wants. We need to take control of access, or at least make it painful enough that he comes to the table. Make it painful, not cooperate, not negotiate. Make it painful." There it was, in her own words. And better still, attached to that email was a memo Karen had drafted, never formally submitted, proposing a temporary control checkpoint on the access road due to increased unknown vehicular activity. The best part? It was time-stamped the day before the anonymous ATF call. Mary damn near giggled when she saw it. They don't even need enemies. she said. They do it to themselves. The deeper we dug, the more it became clear this wasn't just one bad call or an overreaction. It was a calculated plan to intimidate, push, and control. Silverguard was quick to try and distance themselves. Their official response stated that their officers acted upon credible intelligence provided by the client and followed standard operating procedures. Translation: don't sue us, blame the HOA. But we weren't having it. The guard who had manhandled Mark and blocked the truck had no legal right to stop any vehicle on a public road. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't even a rent-a-cop with a badge. He was a hired thug with a radio and a laminated policy sheet. To drive the point home, Rosso filed a separate bar complaint against the HOA's attorney, citing potential conflict of interest and misrepresentation. Mary sent a formal request to the county to reaffirm the public status of the road, which they did in writing, with a big damn seal on the bottom. Granite Pines had no jurisdiction, no claim, and no authority over that stretch. When we made the lawsuit public, the media finally caught wind. At first, it was just a few local reporters sniffing around, but then someone dropped the words "false terrorism report" into an interview, and everything blew up. Near Fox 5, Atlanta ran a segment. The headline read, "HOA accused of triggering ATF raid over furniture delivery." It was like watching Karen's grip on the narrative slip one greasy inch at a time. That week, the HOA called for an emergency board meeting. Some members started pushing for a settlement. Others wanted to double down and protect the integrity of the community. I wasn't invited, obviously, but someone leaked the minutes to me anyway. Apparently, Karen stood at the head of the meeting and said, "This isn't about him. This is about preserving order. We can't let people use our roads unchecked. Our roads. The same public access road I had legal rights to use. At that point, I didn't even need to say anything. They were burying themselves. But just in case they tried to crawl out, we were ready to push them right back down with $1 million boot." The email came in around 2 in the morning. No subject line. Just a name in the sender field I barely recognized. John R. Granite Pines. I almost deleted it without reading, thinking it was another HOA threat disguised as community outreach. But something made me click. There were only 2 lines in the body. "I don't agree with what she's doing. I have information. Please call me. John Rivers." I stared at it for a while. John Rivers. I'd seen the name in the Discovery docs. Treasurer, I think. Kept a low profile. Never spoke at HOA meetings, at least not in the clips I'd seen online. I debated ignoring it. The last thing I needed was some HOA rat trying to play both sides for damage control. But curiosity got the better of me. I called the next morning, half expecting him to ghost me. He picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Bennett," he said quietly. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you, but I can't stay quiet anymore." He didn't waste time. Said he wanted to meet somewhere off the radar. We ended up sitting in his car in a back lot behind a strip mall in Alpharetta, like we were doing a damn drug deal. The guy looked tired. Mid-50s probably, but the kind of tired that seeps into your bones when your conscience has been eating you alive. He started talking before I could even ask anything. "I didn't know she was going to do this," he said. "Not like this. We talked about the road, sure. Everyone on the board hated that you were going to use it, but she went further." I stayed quiet. Let him unravel. "She told us it was about safety. That's how she sold it. Said she had connections that would let her flag suspicious vehicles without waiting on county bureaucracy. Said if we didn't act, the neighborhood would become a target for infiltration." Her words, not mine. I raised an eyebrow. "Infiltration?" He nodded, looking embarrassed. "She came from the TSA, you know. Still acts like she's running counter-terror ops. She said the road was a security liability and started floating the idea of checkpoints. I asked him directly, 'Did she tell you to lie about the truck?' 'No, not directly.' He paused, but she told us what she wanted to be true. That the truck didn't match the HOA's clearance list, that it made a stop near a vacant lot, that it had odd activity around it the night before. She showed us pictures, grainy, taken from her Ring cam. Said we could interpret them as suspicious if we wanted to. Interpret, of course. Then he dropped the real bomb. She also threatened us, he said. A few of us. Quietly. If we didn't back her, she'd make life difficult. Told me she could have the HOA audit my spending records. Said I'd signed off on 2 landscaping contracts without a second bid, which technically violates policy. Was it true? He shrugged. Technically, yeah, but nothing serious. Everyone does it, but the way she said it, she made it clear she'd bury me if I spoke out. That made my blood boil. This wasn't just a power trip, it was a hostile takeover with spreadsheets. He showed me his phone. He still had the texts. John, I'd really hate for the board to start asking questions about that Green Edge invoice. Let's stay aligned on the truck issue. We need to present a united front. Dissent will just prolong the community's exposure. It wasn't just pressure, it was blackmail. John looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to testify. I'll sign a sworn statement. I've already told the other board members I'm stepping down. They think it's a health thing. It was a health thing, I realized, the kind that eats at your soul. Mary was ecstatic when I told her. She immediately scheduled a formal deposition and requested emergency permission to amend our complaint, adding Karen's use of coercion and retaliation against other board members. That upped the stakes. We weren't just dealing with HOA overreach anymore. We had the makings of a civil RICO case. Rosso took it a step further. If we proved this was an organized effort using false pretenses and intimidation to control territory and suppress opposition, that's not just civil liability. That's conspiracy, possibly extortion. Mark, still reeling from the fallout of his suspension, started to smile again for the first time in days. So, now it's not just me versus HOA Karen. It's Karen versus the United States. But Karen didn't flinch. That week, she showed up at a local town hall meeting with her usual Stepford wife composure, claiming she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by disgruntled outsiders trying to dismantle community unity. Her audience? A bunch of retirees in golf polos who clapped like she was Moses coming down from the mountain, but the cracks were starting to show. That same night, someone anonymously leaked a board recording to a local blog. In it, Karen can be heard shouting at a fellow member, "You think I care about jurisdiction? I'll shut that road down myself if I have to." The video went viral in under 24 hours. I didn't need to go on the offensive anymore. The HOA was collapsing from within, and we hadn't even reached the courtroom yet. There's a distinct kind of silence in a courtroom just before the first witness is called. It's not the peaceful kind. It's the kind of silence that hangs heavy, like humidity before a thunderstorm. Everyone's waiting, lawyers sharpening their pens, reporters with fingers poised over keyboards, and me sitting at the plaintiff's table, eyes locked on the woman who started this whole circus. Karen Westmore looked like she was attending a garden club meeting, not the opening of a federal civil case. Hair perfectly blown out, navy blue suit pressed within an inch of its life, lips pursed in that permanent expression of being mildly inconvenienced by the existence of other humans. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone in the room. Not to her lawyers, not to the press, not even to the remaining HOA board members who were seated in the gallery looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Maybe Siberia. First witness called, Agent Thomas Keller from the ATF. He laid it all out with the precision of a man who'd been testifying for decades, described the contents of the tip line call, the language used, the urgency it created, and the protocol that was triggered as a result. He went on record saying there was zero evidence of any criminal or hazardous materials, and that the report was crafted in a manner designed to simulate a credible terror threat. Karen's lead attorney objected. Speculation, he said. Like that would erase the weight in the room. The judge leaned over his bench. Overruled. Let the record show the agent has authority to interpret procedural triggers within his bureau. And just like that, it was in the books. Next came Mark. I watched him straighten his shoulders and walk to the stand with the kind of focus I'd seen before on construction sites during a crisis, when the pressure's so high that you either crack or you go cold. He told them about the delivery, the route, the sudden blockade, how he was yanked out of his truck, how he was cuffed before anyone even asked for ID, how he spent 12 hours in holding while his employer fielded calls from panicked clients. When he said the words, "They treated me like I was smuggling nerve gas instead of a refrigerator," you could feel the tension shift. A few people in the back actually winced. Then came the moment everyone in the courtroom seemed to be waiting for. The board insider. John Rivers walked to the stand like he was heading to confession, and in a way, he was. He testified under oath about the internal pressure campaign, about Karen's threats, her manipulation, the emails, the painful enough comment. He confirmed that Karen had drafted false HOA documentation claiming my parcel was under community dispute, which she had forwarded to the private security firm to justify their blockade. I looked at Karen during his testimony. She didn't move. Not a blink. Not a twitch. But her lawyer's pen stopped moving. Mary followed up with the exhibits. Photos, documents, time-stamped messages. She brought the county zoning rep in next, who calmly confirmed that my property was outside of the HOA's jurisdiction and that the access road was, and had always been, publicly maintained. Silver Guard's defense tried to claim their officers were acting under client instruction, but the judge wasn't having it. He looked directly at their rep and said, "You understand that detaining a civilian on a public road based on a private policy is not just overreach, it's unlawful imprisonment?" "Yes, Your Honor." They said it quietly. The final punch came when the prosecutor from the DA's office, who had been watching silently, stood and made a brief statement to the judge. "Your Honor, based on the sworn testimony and documentation presented today, the state intends to open a parallel criminal inquiry into Ms. Westmore's actions, specifically the falsification of community documentation and the initiation of a knowingly false federal threat report." Karen's head finally moved, just a quarter-inch tilt. But I saw it. For the first time, something cracked. I won't pretend I didn't enjoy that moment. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Mark and I didn't say much. Our attorneys made a short statement, reaffirming our intent to see the civil case through and that any criminal proceedings were in the state's hands now. That night, Mary called. "They're rattled," she said. "Silver Guard's lawyers just reached out about a possible partial settlement." I grinned. "Tell them they can start by covering the cost of the furniture they turned into evidence." "Oh, I already did." With interest. Meanwhile, Granite Pines was in panic mode. Residents had started attending board meetings en masse, demanding explanations. Half the board had tendered unofficial resignations. Rumors swirled about Karen being censured. But we weren't done yet, because the next court date. That one wasn't just about compensation. That one would determine whether Karen Westmore's little HOA empire was just going to crumble or explode. The week before the final hearing, Granite Pines turned into a fortress. Not the good kind, the kind where everyone's watching each other from behind their shutters, whispering rumors through cracked windows. HOA meetings were now being held behind closed doors, attendance restricted for safety reasons, and residents started organizing their own unofficial gatherings to discuss the Karen problem. And Karen disappeared. No press statements. No Facebook rants. Not even one of her signature door-to-door flyers claiming she was being persecuted by anti-community radicals. Just radio silence. Until one morning, I got a text from Mary. No greeting, just a screenshot. It was an email from the HOA lawyer to the court. "Ms. Westmore will not be present at the hearing due to personal medical travel. We request a continuance." Mary responded with a single word. "Bullshit." I didn't need convincing. Karen wasn't sick. Karen was running. Rosso pulled in some favors from a buddy at the Fulton County DA's office and confirmed what we suspected. Karen had bought a one-way ticket to Costa Rica under her maiden name 3 days earlier. The date on the passport match request. The same day, she'd received court notification that she was being added to a formal criminal investigation for falsification of documents and filing a fraudulent federal tip. She was going to flee. Rosso and Mary moved faster than I thought humanly possible. Within hours, they contacted the presiding judge and submitted a motion for risk of flight. The DA's office backed it immediately. By noon, a bench warrant was signed, and Karen Westmore was officially a fugitive. The feds caught her at Hartsfield-Jackson, standing in line for TSA pre-check, like she wasn't the subject of 3 pending lawsuits and a federal criminal investigation. The image hit the news before court even reconvened. Karen, flanked by 2 TSA agents, still dressed in her usual classy suburban dictator style, silk scarf, oversized sunglasses, luggage monogrammed with a KW, being marched away as cameras rolled. One local anchor dubbed it the flight of the HOA Queen. You couldn't write this kind of theater. Court was packed on hearing day. More media, more lawyers, more tension. Mark was there, looking sharper than I'd ever seen him, and his company had already reached out to reinstate him now that the truth was public. John Rivers sat quietly in the back, no longer hiding. The rest of the HOA board? Absent. When Karen was brought in, this time in cuffs, wearing a county-issued jumpsuit and an expression that could freeze fire, the room held its breath. She didn't look at me. Not once. The judge, to his credit, didn't gloat. But he made it clear what had started as a civil matter had grown into something deeply disturbing, involving deliberate attempts to manipulate both legal and federal agencies under the guise of community safety. He listed the confirmed offenses, like a drum roll: filing a knowingly false report to a federal agency, falsifying community documentation, unlawful detainment through unlicensed private security, attempted flight to evade prosecution, coercion of HOA board members. Then the kicker. This court finds Karen Westmore in contempt and orders her immediate remand to federal custody pending trial on multiple felony counts. The courtroom didn't cheer, but I'll be honest, I heard someone exhale like they'd just dropped a backpack full of bricks. Karen tried to speak once. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, and she sank back into her seat, lips pressed so tight they turned white. The hearing continued with little resistance. Silverguard's settlement was approved: six-figure payout to Mark, partial restitution to me, and immediate termination of their contract with Granite Pines. They issued a formal apology, which no one believed. Then the judge moved to the HOA itself. He declared their conduct in direct violation of both municipal cooperation guidelines and state-level civil rights protections. A formal audit of HOA operations was ordered. The state HOA Oversight Board was notified. Granite Pines was effectively paralyzed. And with Karen gone, the other board members had started turning on each other like rats in a flooding basement. The treasurer resigned. The secretary claimed she was just following orders. One of them even filed a restraining order against the HOA, citing a hostile and retaliatory environment. Mary turned to me and whispered, "You didn't just win. You detonated the entire structure." We walked out of the courthouse into flashing lights and a wall of reporters. Mark made a statement about justice and accountability. I didn't say much, just looked into the camera and said, "Don't ever let people scare you off your own land." Simple, final, and true. You'd think that after watching a tyrant in pearls get dragged off in cuffs, life would snap back to normal. It didn't. But it got quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your wind chimes again. The lawsuit was settled within 3 weeks of Karen's arrest. The court awarded me exactly what we asked for: $250,000 in damages plus legal fees. Mark got the full $750,000. Silverguard, now hemorrhaging clients across the Southeast, agreed to pay out fast to avoid more headlines. Their CEO resigned 2 days later, citing health concerns. Corporate speak, for this is on fire and I'm getting out. Granite Pines HOA didn't survive. By the time the state audit rolled in, 3 board members had resigned, 2 were facing civil charges, and 1 was still pretending she didn't really know what Karen was doing. The audit uncovered years of petty misuse of funds, landscaping, invoices paid to cousins, bulk purchases of surveillance equipment that turned out to be backyard motion lights from Home Depot, and a baffling expense for emergency preparedness consultancy that led to a guy in a Hawaiian shirt teaching CPR in someone's garage. Facing fines, sanctions, and the PR disaster of the century, the remaining HOA members voted, quietly, privately, and without public announcement, to dissolve the association. Granite Pines was left leaderless. Residents were given the option to form a voluntary civic committee instead. Most chose not to. Karen remained in federal custody, awaiting trial. Her bail was denied on flight risk grounds. Rumors swirled about her flipping on someone higher up. But the truth was simpler. She had no one left to shield her. No allies, no HOA army, just court dates and lawyers, and a growing list of people who wanted nothing to do with her. As for me, I went back to building. My kitchen was finally finished. The walnut cabinets were worth the fight. I poured bourbon into a glass and leaned against the counter the night the last appliance went in, staring out the big bay window at the road that had started it all. My road. I installed a new gate at the entrance, not to keep people out, but to make a statement. Above it hangs a steel sign, laser-etched and bolted into the wood like gospel. Private access road trespassing will be prosecuted. This property is not subject to HOA authority. Deliveries welcome. It's funny how something as small as a street can become a battlefield. Mark and I still talk. He got his contracts back, plus a few new ones from clients who liked the idea of hiring the guy who took on a rogue HOA and walked away clean. The media died down eventually, as it always does. But for a little while, we were symbols, proof that you could push back, that you didn't have to let people in blazers and clipboards dictate the borders of your life. And then, one afternoon, a young couple pulled up just past my gate in a dusty old Jeep. They waved, asked if I was the guy from the HOA story. I grinned. Depends who's asking. They laughed and said they'd just bought a nearby plot. Said they wanted advice on how to handle Granite Pines' welcoming committee, who'd already tried to hand them a copy of the community guidelines. I handed them a copy of my lawsuit instead. They took it, wide-eyed, and said, "Thank you." As they pulled away, I stood there for a moment, watching the dust rise behind their wheels. A new road, a different fight, but this time someone else wouldn't be starting from zero.